My wife's mother called our marriage unhealthy and attacked my finances. I threw her out, and her access to our marriage and money ended overnight. My marriage was unhealthy. This woman had been circling our relationship like a vulture for months, picking apart every decision we made, every dollar we spent, every choice that didn't align with her outdated vision of what a marriage should look like. It started innocently enough. Sunday dinners at her house, family gatherings where she'd make these passive-aggressive comments about how I handled my wife. But it wasn't innocent. Nothing about this woman was innocent. She had this way of disguising her criticism as concern, wrapping her judgments in motherly worry that made it harder to call out directly. The breaking point came during what should have been a routine family dinner. We were sitting around her dining room table, the same table where she'd been chipping away at my authority for months. My wife was helping serve dessert when her mother decided to launch into her latest sermon about modern marriages. "You know, I've been thinking about your relationship," she said, cutting into her pie with surgical precision. "It seems rather unhealthy how much control you have over the finances. A woman should have more independence, more say in how money gets spent." I watched my wife freeze mid-pour of coffee. This wasn't the first time this topic had come up. The woman had been planting these seeds for weeks, questioning every budget decision, every financial choice we made as a couple. She'd whispered to my wife about how she deserved better, how she should demand more freedom with spending, how a real man wouldn't restrict his wife's access to money. The accusation hung in the air like smoke from a grease fire. Control. Unhealthy. The words were carefully chosen, designed to make me look like some kind of financial dictator. But here's what she didn't understand about our marriage. We had a system that worked. We had goals we were working toward together. We had a partnership built on mutual respect and shared responsibility. "Control is an interesting word choice," I said, setting down my fork and looking directly at her. "Are you planning to cover our bills if we follow your financial advice?" The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. My wife's eyes went wide. Her father shifted uncomfortably in his chair, and the mother-in-law's face went through about 3 different shades of red before settling on a nice burgundy that matched her lipstick. "Excuse me?" she managed to sputter. "I asked if you're covering our bills," I repeated, my voice steady and clear. "Since you seem to have such strong opinions about how we manage our money, I'm wondering if you're planning to back up that advice with actual financial support." The silence stretched between us like a taut wire. I could see the calculations running behind her eyes, the realization that I wasn't going to roll over and accept her criticism, like some apologetic son-in-law desperate for approval. "That's not the point," she said, trying to regain her footing. "The point is that healthy marriages require equality, and what I'm seeing here doesn't look equal." "What you're seeing here," I said, leaning back in my chair, "is a marriage that functions without a running commentary from the peanut gallery. But I appreciate your concern for our equality. Really touching." My wife was staring at me now, her coffee cup frozen halfway to her lips. I could see the conflict playing out across her face. Part of her wanted to defend her mother, but another part of her knew exactly what had been happening these past few months. The constant undermining, the subtle suggestions that I was somehow holding her back, the implications that she was some kind of victim in her own marriage. "I think we should probably head home," my wife said quietly. But her mother wasn't finished. "I'm just saying that when I was your age, women had more independence. We didn't have to ask permission for every purchase, every decision. We were partners, not subordinates. That did it." The implication that my wife was a subordinate, that our marriage was some kind of power struggle where I held all the cards while she suffered in silence. This woman had been building toward this moment for months, and now she was going for the kill shot. "You know what's fascinating about your generation's independence?" I said, standing up from the table. "You talk about equality while expecting someone else to foot the bill for your daughter's newfound freedom. You want her to have independence from our shared financial goals, but you're not offering to replace the stability that those goals provide." The room was dead silent now. Even the father-in-law had stopped pretending to eat his pie. My wife was looking between her mother and me like she was watching a tennis match. But this wasn't a game. This was about respect, boundaries, and who actually had authority in our marriage. "I think it's time we left," I said, helping my wife with her coat. "Thanks for dinner and for the marriage advice. Really enlightening." As we walked to the car, I could feel the weight of what had just happened. This wasn't just about money or marriage advice. This was about a woman who couldn't accept that her daughter had chosen someone who wouldn't bow to her influence, someone who saw through the manipulation and wasn't afraid to call it out. The drive home was quiet, but it wasn't the comfortable quiet of a couple processing their evening. It was the tense quiet of a storm building on the horizon. My wife was staring out the window, her hands folded in her lap, and I knew that whatever happened next would determine whether we faced this challenge together or let it tear us apart. What I didn't know was that this was just the beginning. The mother-in-law had been testing boundaries for months, and now she knew exactly where I stood. The question was whether my wife would stand with me or continue to let her mother chip away at the foundation we'd built together. The war had officially begun. The fallout from that dinner didn't take long to manifest. Within a week, I started noticing changes in my wife's behavior, little things at first. She'd hesitate before making purchases we'd already discussed. She'd bring up conversations about our budget that felt rehearsed, like she was reading from a script someone else had written. The first real sign came when she suggested we needed to reassess our financial priorities. We were sitting at our kitchen table going through our monthly expenses like we always did, when she dropped that phrase like it was something she'd been practicing. Reassess how? I asked, looking up from our budget spreadsheet. Well, maybe we should consider giving me more discretionary spending money for personal things. Independence. You know, independence. There was that word again. The same word her mother had been using like a weapon at the dinner table. It wasn't my wife's vocabulary. She'd never talked about independence before because she'd never felt like she lacked it. We made decisions together. We planned together. We succeeded together. Where is this coming from? I asked directly. She shifted in her seat, avoiding eye contact. I've just been thinking about how other couples handle money. Other couples, or your mother? The question hung between us like a confession she wasn't ready to make. I could see the guilt flicker across her face, the recognition that she'd been caught parroting someone else's agenda. She's not wrong about everything, she said defensively. Maybe I should have more say in how we spend money. You have plenty of say. We discuss every major purchase. We plan our budget together. What exactly are you feeling restricted from doing? She couldn't answer that question because there wasn't a real answer. This wasn't about restriction or control. This was about her mother planting seeds of doubt about our partnership, making her question decisions that had been working perfectly fine for years. But the mother-in-law wasn't content with just influencing my wife. She was building a campaign. I discovered just how extensive it was when my wife's sister called me directly. I'm worried about you two, she said during what I thought was a casual phone call. Mom mentioned that things have been tense lately, that you've been pretty controlling about money. Controlling, there was that word again. The mother-in-law had been making the rounds, spreading her version of our marriage to anyone who would listen. She was building a narrative where I was the villain and my wife was the victim, laying the groundwork for whatever move she was planning next. Did she mention that she's been giving unsolicited marriage advice for months? I asked. Or that she's been undermining our financial decisions without knowing anything about our actual situation? She's just concerned. She wants what's best for her daughter. What's best for her daughter is a marriage that doesn't require management from the peanut gallery. But I appreciate your concern too. Really touching. The sister-in-law went quiet for a moment, clearly not expecting me to push back. They were all used to dealing with men who would apologize, who would try to smooth things over, who would accept the criticism and promise to do better. But I wasn't that man. Maybe you could try to be more understanding, she suggested. Mom's just trying to help. Help with what exactly? We're not struggling, we're not fighting about money, we're not having problems until she creates them. So what exactly is she helping with? I could hear the frustration in her voice when she realized her diplomatic approach wasn't working. I think you're being a little harsh. I think I'm being exactly as harsh as the situation requires, but thanks for the feedback. After I hung up, I realized the full scope of what was happening. The mother-in-law wasn't just giving advice. She was recruiting allies, building a case against me that she could present to my wife as evidence that everyone was concerned about our marriage. The next morning, I found my wife on the phone with her mother, speaking in hushed tones that stopped immediately when I entered the room. The conversation was clearly about me, about us, about whatever strategy they were developing to address the problem they'd decided I represented. Everything okay? I asked after she hung up. Just talking to Mom about the situation. What situation? The situation from dinner. She's still upset about how you talked to her. I sat down across from her, studying her face. Are you upset about how I talked to her? She was quiet for a long moment, clearly torn between loyalty to her mother and loyalty to her marriage. I think you could have handled it differently. How should I have handled it? Should I have nodded along while she criticized our marriage? Should I have apologized for making financial decisions with my own wife? Should I have thanked her for the advice and promised to do better? You could have been more diplomatic. Diplomatic about what? About her calling our marriage unhealthy? About her implying that I control you? About her suggesting that our financial partnership is somehow wrong? My wife didn't have an answer for that because there wasn't a diplomatic response to someone attacking the foundation of your marriage. There wasn't a polite way to handle disrespect, manipulation, and interference. She's my mother was all she could manage. And I'm your husband. Which relationship takes priority here? That question forced her to confront the choice she'd been avoiding. She'd been trying to keep everyone happy, to maintain peace between her mother and her marriage, but that wasn't possible anymore. The mother-in-law had made it impossible by forcing this conflict. I just want everyone to get along, she said quietly. That's not an option anymore. Your mother has decided that I'm the problem in our marriage. She's recruiting family members to support her position. She's influencing your decisions and undermining our partnership. Getting along isn't on the table. I could see the realization dawning on her face, the recognition that this wasn't just about one uncomfortable dinner or one awkward conversation. This was about her mother systematically working to damage our marriage, using family loyalty as a weapon against our unity. What do you want me to do? She asked. I want you to decide whether you're married to me or to your mother's opinion of me, because you can't have both anymore. The ultimatum wasn't cruel. It was necessary. The mother-in-law had forced this choice by making it impossible for me to coexist with her influence. She'd drawn the battle lines, and now everyone had to choose a side. What I didn't know was that she was already planning her next move. The phone calls and family conversations were just the beginning. She was building towards something bigger, something that would force this conflict into the open where she thought she could win. She'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that I would back down when faced with family pressure. She'd assumed that I would choose peace over principle, that I would sacrifice my authority as a husband to maintain harmony with her. She was about to learn how wrong she was. The surprise visit happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was working from home when I heard my wife's voice at the front door, followed by that unmistakable sound of her mother's heels clicking across our hardwood floors. No call ahead, no invitation, just the assumption that she could walk into our home whenever she pleased. I stayed in my office, letting them have their conversation while I finished some work. But then I heard something that made my blood pressure spike, the sound of papers rustling, drawers opening, and her mother's voice getting louder as she moved through our living room. These credit card statements are concerning, I heard her say. And look at this electric bill. Are you sure you're managing things properly? I walked out of my office to find her standing at our kitchen counter with our mail spread out in front of her like she was conducting an audit. Bills, statements, personal correspondence, all of it laid out for her inspection, like she had some kind of right to examine our private financial information. Find everything interesting? I asked, walking into the kitchen. She looked up without an ounce of shame or embarrassment. I was just helping your wife organize these bills. Some of these amounts seem excessive. Excessive based on what standard? Your budget or ours? My wife was standing nearby, clearly uncomfortable, but not intervening. She'd let her mother into our home, allowed her to go through our personal documents, and was now watching this confrontation unfold without taking a side. Based on the standard of responsible financial management, her mother replied, holding up our electricity bill like it was evidence of some crime. This is nearly $200. That's excessive for a house this size. Is it your house? I asked, walking closer to where she stood. Excuse me? I asked if it's your house. Are you paying this bill? Are you responsible for the electricity that powers our home? She set the bill down but didn't step back. I'm trying to help my daughter understand what reasonable expenses look like. By going through our private mail without permission, I was invited here. You were invited to go through our financial documents. You were invited to audit our bills. You were invited to judge our spending habits. The questions came fast and direct, each one designed to expose the audacity of what she was doing. She'd crossed a line that most people wouldn't even consider approaching, and she was acting like it was perfectly normal behavior. I'm concerned about my daughter's financial future, she said, trying to regain control of the conversation. Your daughter's financial future is none of your business. Her financial present is none of your business. Her financial past is none of your business. Are we clear on that? You can't speak to me that way. I can speak to you however I want in my own home, especially when you're going through my personal documents without permission. My wife finally found her voice. Maybe we should all just calm down. Calm down? I turned to look at her. Your mother is standing in our kitchen going through our bills, criticizing our spending, and you want me to calm down? She's just trying to help. Help with what? We're not behind on bills. We're not struggling financially. We're not asking for advice. So what exactly is she helping with? The question hung in the air because there wasn't a good answer. This wasn't about help. This was about control, about a woman who couldn't accept that her daughter had built a life that didn't require her constant supervision and input. I think you're overreacting, my wife said quietly. Am I? Your mother walked into our home uninvited, went through our private mail, and is now standing here criticizing our financial decisions. Which part of my reaction is excessive? Her mother saw the opportunity to jump back into the conversation. I'm not criticizing anything. I'm simply pointing out that some of these expenses could be managed more efficiently. Efficiently according to whom? You? Are you an expert on our lifestyle, our needs, our priorities? I'm an expert on raising responsible children who know how to manage money. That comment hit like a slap across the face, the implication that I was irresponsible, that I was somehow failing as a financial partner, that I needed lessons from her on how to manage my own household. Let me make something crystal clear, I said, stepping closer to where she stood. Your expertise is not needed here. Your opinion is not requested here. Your involvement is not welcome here. I have a right to be concerned about my daughter. You have a right to your concerns. You don't have a right to act on them in my home. You don't have a right to go through my mail. You don't have a right to criticize my financial decisions. She was getting flustered now, realizing that her usual tactics weren't working. She'd probably almost expected me to back down, to apologize for my tone, to accept her criticism and promise to do better. I think you need to leave, I said, gathering up the bills and statements she'd spread across our counter. I'm not finished talking to my daughter. Yes, you are. This conversation is over, this visit is over, and this behavior is over. My wife stepped forward, clearly torn between supporting her mother and supporting her marriage. Maybe we can all just sit down and talk about this rationally. There's nothing rational about what just happened here, I said, still collecting our personal documents. Your mother came into our home uninvited, went through our private mail, and started criticizing our financial decisions. That's not rational. That's invasive. I was invited, her mother insisted. You were invited to go through our bills? Silence. You were invited to critique our spending? More silence. You were invited to audit our financial decisions? The silence stretched between us like a confession. She'd overstepped, and she knew it. But she wasn't going to apologize because apologizing would mean admitting that she'd been wrong. And women like her never admitted they were wrong. I think it's time for you to go, I said, walking toward the front door. I'm not leaving until I finish talking to my daughter. Yes, you are. This is my home, and I'm asking you to leave. She looked at my wife, expecting support, expecting her daughter to override my decision and insist that she stay. But my wife was quiet, processing what had just happened, realizing that her mother had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. I'll call you later, my wife said quietly. Her mother gathered her purse, clearly frustrated that her power play hadn't worked. She'd probably expected to find evidence of financial mismanagement, proof that I was irresponsible or controlling. Instead, she'd found a man who wouldn't tolerate her interference. This isn't over, she said as she headed toward the door. Yes, it is. And if you ever go through my personal documents again, we're going to have a much more serious conversation. After she left, the house felt different. The violation of privacy hung in the air like smoke from a fire. My wife stood in the kitchen staring at the spot where her mother had been examining our bills. I can't believe she did that, she said quietly. Can't you? Because I can. This is exactly what I've been trying to tell you about her behavior. She nodded slowly, finally seeing what I'd been seeing for months. The manipulation, the boundary violations, the complete lack of respect for our marriage and our privacy. What do we do now? She asked. Now we establish some real boundaries, and we decide whether those boundaries are going to be respected or whether we're going to have to enforce them. The war was escalating, and her mother had just made a tactical error that would cost her dearly. She'd shown her hand, revealed the extent of her willingness to violate our privacy and interfere in our marriage. But more importantly, she'd finally opened my wife's eyes to what was really happening, and that was going to change everything. The phone call came during a client meeting. I was presenting a quarterly report when my personal line started ringing. I ignored it the first time, but when it rang again immediately, I knew something was wrong. Nobody calls back to back unless there's an emergency. "Excuse me for just a moment," I told my clients, stepping into the hallway to answer. "We need to talk about that furniture purchase," came her voice without even a greeting. My mother-in-law had called me at work to discuss furniture, not to check on her daughter, not to apologize for going through our mail, but to continue her campaign of interference. "I'm sorry, what? The dining room set you bought last weekend. That was completely unnecessary. You already have a perfectly good table." I stood there in the hallway, clients waiting in the conference room, trying to process the audacity of what was happening. She'd somehow found out about a furniture purchase my wife and I had made together, and now she was calling me at work to criticize it. "How do you know about our furniture purchase?" "That's not important. What's important is that you're wasting money on things you don't need while claiming you can't afford to give my daughter more spending freedom." The pieces clicked together instantly. My wife had told her about the dining room set probably during one of their daily phone conversations. But more than that, she'd framed it as something I had decided unilaterally, something that proved her mother's point about financial control. "Are you calling me at work to discuss my furniture choices?" "I'm calling you to discuss your irresponsible spending habits. A $3,000 dining room set when you could have bought something for half that price. $3,000 of my money for my house, for my family, none of which concerns you. It concerns me when it affects my daughter's quality of life." I walked further down the hallway, away from the conference room where my clients were waiting. This conversation was about to get heated, and I didn't need witnesses for what was coming next. "Let me explain something to you," I said, my voice dropping to a level that cut through her self-righteous tone. "My spending decisions are not your business. My financial choices are not your concern. My purchases are not subject to your approval. They are when they affect my daughter. Your daughter was there when we bought the furniture. Your daughter helped pick it out. Your daughter agreed to the purchase. Your daughter is happy with the decision. So where exactly is the problem? The problem is that you're spending money frivolously while restricting her access to discretionary funds." "Restricting her access. She has full access to our accounts. She can buy whatever she wants whenever she wants. What she can't do is blow our budget without discussion, just like I can't blow our budget without discussion. It's called partnership. It's called control." That word again, the same word she'd been using like a weapon for weeks, trying to reframe every aspect of our marriage through the lens of power and control. But I was done letting her control the narrative. "You know what control looks like?" I asked. "Control looks like calling someone at work to criticize their personal purchases. Control looks like going through someone's private mail without permission. Control looks like manipulating your daughter against her husband." "I'm not manipulating anyone." "Really? So you didn't tell her that our furniture purchase was proof of financial irresponsibility? You didn't suggest that she should demand more spending freedom because of it? You didn't frame this as evidence that I'm controlling her finances?" The silence on the other end told me everything I needed to know. She'd been caught red-handed, and she knew it. "I'm looking out for my daughter's best interests." "No, you're looking out for your need to control your daughter's life. And when you can't control her directly, you're trying to control her marriage. That's ridiculous." "Is it? Then explain to me why you're calling me at work to discuss furniture. Explain to me why you're going through our mail. Explain to me why you're having secret conversations with family members about our marriage." I could hear her breathing change the realization that I knew more about her campaign than she'd assumed. She'd been operating under the assumption that I was oblivious to her manipulations, that I didn't see the bigger picture of what she was doing. "I don't have to explain anything to you." "You're right, you don't. But you also don't get to continue this behavior without consequences." "What's that supposed to mean?" "It means that your access to information about our life is officially cut off. No more financial discussions, no more details about our purchases, no more insight into our decisions. You can't keep me from talking to my daughter." "I can't, and I won't. But I can make sure that our private business stays private, and I can make sure that your attempts to undermine our marriage stop here." "I'm not undermining anything. You called me at work to criticize furniture we bought with our own money. If that's not undermining, what would you call it?" She didn't have an answer for that because there wasn't one. This wasn't about concern for her daughter. This wasn't about financial responsibility. This was about a woman who couldn't accept that her role in her daughter's life had changed. "I think this conversation is over," she said, clearly frustrated that her usual tactics weren't working. "I think you're right. And I think all future conversations about our personal business are over too." "We'll see about that." "No, we won't, because there's nothing to see. You've lost the privilege of having an opinion about our life." I hung up without waiting for a response and walked back into the conference room where my clients were waiting. They could probably tell from my expression that something had happened, but they were professional enough not to ask. "Sorry about that," I said, settling back into my chair. "Family emergency." The irony wasn't lost on me. It was a family emergency, but not the kind they were probably imagining. This was the emergency of a woman who had declared war on my marriage and was now learning that I wasn't going to fight fair. When I got home that evening, my wife was waiting for me in the living room. She looked guilty, like someone who'd been caught doing something they knew was wrong. "Mom called me after she talked to you," she said before I could even put my briefcase down. I figured she would. "She said you were very rude to her." I was very clear with her. If she interpreted that as rude, that's her problem. She was just concerned about the furniture expense. She was concerned about maintaining control over our decisions. There's a difference. My wife was quiet for a long moment, processing the implications of what had happened. Her mother had crossed another line, and this time there was no way to pretend it was innocent concern. "I may have mentioned the dining room set when we were talking yesterday," she admitted. "You may have." "I did. I told her about it, but I didn't think she'd call you at work." "What did you think she'd do? Send a congratulatory card?" She didn't answer because she knew exactly what her mother would do. She'd known that sharing that information would give her mother ammunition to use against me, against our marriage, against our decisions. "This has to stop," I said, sitting down across from her. "The phone calls, the interference, the constant criticism, all of it has to stop." "I know." "Do you? Because your actions suggest otherwise. You're still sharing information with her that she's using against me. You're still allowing her to influence your thoughts about our marriage." She nodded slowly, finally understanding the full scope of what her mother had been doing, the manipulation, the boundary violations, the systematic attempt to undermine our partnership. "What do you want me to do?" she asked. "I want you to choose, your mother or your marriage, because they're incompatible now." The ultimatum hung between us like a sword, but it wasn't cruel or unfair. It was necessary. Her mother had made it necessary by refusing to respect boundaries, by escalating her interference, by forcing this conflict into the open. The war was reaching its climax, and soon everyone would have to choose a side. The text came on a Saturday morning while I was drinking coffee. "Family meeting tomorrow at 2 p.m. We need to discuss your marriage situation." From my wife's sister. I showed the message to my wife, who went pale when she read it. "I didn't know about this," she said quickly. "Didn't know about what a family meeting to discuss our marriage situation? Mom didn't tell me she was organizing anything." But she had. The mother-in-law had decided that since she couldn't control me directly, she'd gather the troops and stage an intervention, a family meeting to address the problem of my behavior, my attitude, my refusal to accept her authority over our marriage. "Are you planning to go?" I asked. "I don't know. Maybe we should. Maybe we can clear the air." "Clear the air about what?" "About your mother's interference, about her boundary violations, about her attempts to control our financial decisions." My wife was quiet, caught between her loyalty to her family and her loyalty to our marriage. She wanted to believe that this meeting was about resolution, about finding a way for everyone to get along, but I knew better. "They're not calling this meeting to apologize," I said. "They're calling it to corner me, to make me the villain in front of the whole family." "You don't know that." "I know exactly that. Your mother has been building a case against me for months. Now she's ready to present it to the jury." Sunday afternoon arrived and we drove to her parents' house in tense silence. The cars in the driveway told me everything I needed to know: sister, brother-in-law, both sets of grandparents. This wasn't a family meeting. This was a tribunal. We walked into the living room to find them all arranged like a court. Her mother sat in the center, flanked by the rest of the family. 2 empty chairs faced the group, one for my wife, one for me. "Thank you both for coming," her mother began, as if she were chairing a board meeting. "We wanted to talk about some concerns we've been having." "Concerns about what?" I asked, still standing. "About your behavior, your attitude toward family, your treatment of your wife." There it was, the accusation laid bare. I was the problem. I was the one who needed to be addressed, corrected, managed. What treatment would that be? The financial control, the disrespect toward me, the way you've been isolating her from her family? Each accusation was designed to paint me as an abuser, a controller, a man who needed to be stopped. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd assumed that I would crumble under family pressure. Let me address each of those points, I said, walking to the center of the room. First, financial control. We make every major financial decision together. We discuss purchases. We plan budgets. We work as a team. What I don't do is let outside parties critique our spending. I look directly at her mother. Second, disrespect. I've been nothing but respectful until you started going through my mail, calling me at work, and undermining my marriage. Respect is earned, not demanded. The room was dead silent. They'd expected me to apologize, to promise to do better, to accept their criticism. Third, isolation. I haven't isolated anyone from anything. What I've done is establish boundaries around our marriage. What I've done is refuse to let this family interfere in our personal decisions. Her mother's face was getting red. You can't speak to us like that. I can speak to you however I want. This is your house, but this is my marriage, and I'm done letting you treat it like community property. We're just trying to help, her sister interjected. Help with what? We're not struggling. We're not fighting. We're not having problems until you create them. So what exactly are you helping with? The question hung in the air because there wasn't a good answer. They weren't helping. They were interfering. They were trying to solve a problem that didn't exist. I think we all need to calm down, my wife said quietly. No, I said, turning to look at her. We don't need to calm down. We need to address this directly. Your family has decided that I'm the problem in our marriage. They've organized this meeting to tell me how to be a better husband. They want me to apologize for setting boundaries. I looked around the room at each of them. But here's what's actually going to happen. I'm going to continue making decisions with my wife about our life, our money, our future. I'm going to continue refusing to accept criticism from people who don't live our life. That's not acceptable, her mother said. It's not your decision to make. It's not your marriage. It's not your life. It's not your business. I walked toward the door, then turned back. And this is the last time we're having this conversation. The next time someone wants to discuss my marriage, they can discuss it without me. My wife followed me to the car, her face pale and shaken. I can't believe you just did that. I can't believe they thought that would work. Did they really think I'd sit there and accept a lecture about how to be married? They're my family, and I'm your husband. Which relationship takes priority? She was quiet for the long drive home, processing what had just happened. Her family had overplayed their hand, and now she had to choose between their approval and her marriage. What happens now? She asked as we pulled into our driveway. Now you decide whether you're married to me or to their opinion of me, because after today, those are your only two options. The war was over. I'd won. But the real question was whether my wife would accept the victory or continue fighting for a peace that was no longer possible. The silence lasted 3 days. 3 days of my wife processing what had happened at that family meeting. 3 days of her realizing that her mother had orchestrated an ambush designed to humiliate me into submission. 3 days of understanding that she had to choose. On Wednesday evening, she came into my office where I was working. I need to tell you something, she said, her voice steady in a way it hadn't been for weeks. I'm listening. I called my mother today. I told her that the interference stops now. No more comments about our finances. No more unsolicited advice about our marriage. No more family meetings to discuss our relationship. I looked up from my computer. How did she take that? About as well as you'd expect. She said I was being manipulated by you. She said I was choosing a man over my family. She said I'd regret this decision. And what did you tell her? I told her that I wasn't choosing a man over my family. I was choosing my marriage over her need to control it. The words hit me like relief after months of tension. She'd finally seen what I'd been seeing all along. The manipulation, the boundary violations, the systematic attempt to undermine our partnership. She didn't take it well, my wife continued. She hung up on me, but I called her back and made it clear that this wasn't a negotiation. These are the new rules. What rules? Our financial decisions are off limits for discussion. Our marriage is not subject to family review. Our personal business stays personal. And if she can't respect those boundaries, then our relationship with her changes. I closed my laptop and gave her my full attention. That must have been difficult. It was. But what was more difficult was watching my mother try to destroy my marriage and not doing anything to stop it. She sat down across from me, and I could see the weight lifting from her shoulders. The constant tension between her loyalty to her family and her loyalty to our marriage was finally resolved. "I owe you an apology," she said. "I let her influence get too far. I let her plant doubts about our relationship. I shared information that gave her ammunition against you. Why? Because I wanted everyone to get along. I wanted to keep the peace. I thought if I could just manage both relationships, everything would work out. But that wasn't possible. No, it wasn't. She made it impossible when she decided you were the enemy." We talked for 2 hours that night about boundaries, about loyalty, about what it means to be married versus what it means to be someone's daughter, about how her mother's behavior had damaged not just our relationship, but her ability to trust her own judgment. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we move forward as a team. Now we make decisions together without outside interference. Now we build the marriage we want, instead of the marriage other people think we should have." The next morning, her mother called. I answered the phone. "I want to speak to my daughter," she said, her voice cold and formal. "She's not available right now." "When will she be available?" "When she decides to call you back. You can't keep me from talking to my daughter." "I'm not keeping you from anything. But the days of you calling our house to criticize our decisions are over. We'll see about that." "No, we won't. Because if you continue this behavior, you'll find yourself with very limited access to our lives." She hung up without another word. 2 weeks later, we received a card in the mail, a simple note that said, "I miss my daughter. I'd like to try again." No admission of wrongdoing, no apology for the months of interference, but an acknowledgement that something needed to change. My wife called her that evening. "We can try again," she said. "But the boundaries we discussed are non-negotiable." "I understand," came the reply, and surprisingly, she seemed to mean it. The first visit after the conflict was awkward but civil. Her mother asked about work, about the weather, about anything except our finances or our marriage. She complimented the house without commenting on what it cost. She noticed new purchases without questioning their necessity. It wasn't warmth, but it was respect. It wasn't friendship, but it was acknowledgement that she'd overstepped and lost the privilege of having an opinion about our personal life. 6 months later, the dynamic had settled into something workable. Her mother had learned that boundary violations came with consequences. My wife had learned that loyalty to her marriage had to come first. And I had learned that sometimes you have to be willing to burn bridges to save the foundation. "Do you think she'll ever really change?" my wife asked one evening. "I think she'll follow the rules because she knows what happens if she doesn't." Is that enough? It's enough for me. I don't need her to like me. I don't need her approval. I just need her to respect the boundaries we've set. And she did, because she'd learned that the alternative was losing access to her daughter's life entirely. She'd learned that her choices were simple: respect our marriage or watch it from a distance. The war was over, and I'd won not because I'd destroyed her, but because I'd refused to let her destroy us. Not because I'd been cruel, but because I'd been clear. Not because I'd demanded submission, but because I'd established consequences. My wife and I were stronger for having gone through it. Our marriage was more solid because we'd been forced to define what it meant to us. Our partnership was deeper because we'd chosen each other over the comfort of family approval. And her mother? She got to be a grandmother who followed the rules instead of a matriarch who made them. It wasn't what she wanted, but it was what she'd earned.